What are you doing right now? Maybe you're driving home, folding laundry, or just letting your mind wander before bed. Ever find yourself craving a story, one that feels calm at first, then slowly grips your heart? If so, stay with me. We share together stories about brave Labrador dog saves a cub from drowning. The valley was quiet, too quiet, for what had just happened hours before. Trees leaned like tired soldiers, their roots still bleeding mud. A faint mist rose from the river, twisting through the pines like ghosts that hadn't decided whether to leave or linger. Somewhere in that hush, the earth still trembled from last night's storm. Ethan pulled over his old van on a ridge above the floodplain, camera in hand, heart still half asleep. He wasn't here for drama. He was chasing peace photographs of calm landscapes that might sell to travel magazines. But nature had other plans. Beside him sat Milo, his golden retriever eyes. Alert nose twitching at the air as if it carried a secret. Ethan smiled. "What do you smell? Buddy trouble? Or breakfast?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but he didn't need to. His tail wagged once, slow, steady like a heartbeat that knew something was coming. The air was strange that morning. You could feel it, like the world had been scrubbed raw, every sound sharper, every scent louder. The river below didn't whisper. It growled. The current clawed at the banks, dragging down branches, pieces of fences, even what looked like an old tire. Ethan lifted his camera and started shooting, capturing light that broke through clouds in thin silver streaks. Beauty and destruction in the same frame, it made him uneasy. Maybe that's why he took long trips like this, far from people, away from mistakes that still followed him like shadows. He crouched near the bank to adjust his lens, and Milo pressed close to his leg. That's when he noticed it. The paw prints. Not human, not canine. Larger, deeper, fresh. A wild cat had passed here not long ago. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Yellowstone wasn't exactly empty of predators. "Let's keep moving, huh?" he whispered. But Milo didn't move. His ears pricked, his gaze fixed on the water. And then a sound. Thin, fragile, like a baby crying beneath the roar of the river. Ethan froze. For a heartbeat, he thought he imagined it. But then it came again, faint and desperate. He leaned closer, scanning the churning water. There, on a dark rock jutting from the current, something small clung to life. A lion cub. It was barely the size of a house cat, drenched, trembling claws, slipping on slick stone. The water rose with each passing second, licking higher toward its tiny chest. Ethan's pulse kicked hard. No way. Not out here. He looked around. No mother, no pride. Just the wild river, and two helpless beings standing above it. He glanced at Milo. "We can't, buddy. It's too dangerous." But the words sounded weak even to himself. The cub's cries cut through him like a memory, sharp, accusing. Years ago, during a summer storm, he'd watched helplessly as his sister's kitten was swept away in a flash flood behind their home. He'd been 13. He still remembered the sound, the small, hopeless sound that had haunted every thunderstorm since. He clenched his jaw. Not again. He grabbed a long branch and edged closer to the water, stretching it toward the cub. For a moment, it almost worked. The cub's paw brushed the tip, but the current snatched it away, spinning it downriver like a broken arrow. Damn it! His boots slipped in the mud, and he nearly fell in. Milo barked once, sharp and urgent. Ethan tried again with a shorter stick. No luck. The cub was slipping lower. Each wave hit harder. The rock was vanishing beneath the surge. He knew if he jumped, the current would eat him alive. His mind raced. There had to be another way. Maybe a rope. a net, something. Then, without a sound, Milo stepped forward. His fur bristled with rain, his eyes fixed on the cub. Ethan saw that look once before, when Milo chased a lost child out of traffic 2 years ago. It wasn't instinct. It was decision. "Milo, no," Ethan shouted. But it was too late. The dog leaped into the river. A flash of gold against the gray water. And then, nothing. Ethan's heart stopped. Milo. For a moment only, the river answered, roaring louder than any fear he'd ever known. Then, through the foam, a head broke the surface. Milo's eyes, fierce chest, heaving. He wasn't swimming aimlessly. He was cutting diagonally across the current, using the flow to reach the rock. Ethan stumbled along the shore, shouting, praying, cursing all at once. His voice cracked, but the wind swallowed his words. Milo pressed on closer and closer, until the cub lifted its paw, a trembling scrap of life reaching for hope. That's when something strange happened. The water between them seemed to calm for just a second, as if holding its breath. Milo reached the rock, nudged the cub with his muzzle, and barked once short and reassuring. The cub hesitated, then leapt. 2 small lives, one of muscle and loyalty, one of pure fear, merged into one fight for survival. Ethan fell to his knees at the edge, helpless but spellbound. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment everything would change. The moment when courage stopped being human. And as the river carried them downstream toward the unknown, a shadow moved in the tall grass behind him. A presence, watching, waiting. The sound of rushing water filled Ethan's ears, but all he could hear was his own heartbeat pounding like thunder. He ran along the muddy bank, eyes locked on the flash of golden fur struggling in the current. Milo was fighting every muscle stretched to its limit, trying to angle toward the cub clinging to his back. Milo, "Come on, boy. You can do this." Ethan's voice cracked, half command, half prayer. For a moment, he thought they were both lost. A log spun through the torrent, smashing against a rock just feet away. The impact sent a spray of water high into the air, and when it cleared, Milo was gone. Ethan's stomach twisted. He screamed again, but only the river answered. Then a bark, faint but alive. He spotted Milo re-emerge farther downstream, still paddling the cub, gripping his fur like a lifeline. That's when Ethan noticed something strange about Milo's eyes. They weren't wild with panic. They were focused, determined, almost calm, like he'd accepted the danger but refused to let it win. Ethan sprinted along the bank, slipping, falling, scrambling back up again. Each time the dog disappeared under the waves, he stopped breathing until Milo's head broke the surface again. It was torture, seconds stretching into hours. And through it all, a single thought haunted him. Why did he do it? No one told Milo to jump. There was no command, no treat, no leash, just instinct, or maybe something greater. Ethan had always believed animals acted on reflex, but this was different. This was choice. He shouted again, voice raw, "Hold on, you're almost there." A root system jutted out from the bank like a web of rescue. Milo turned toward it, his strokes slowing, body trembling. He was running on pure heart now. The cub, drenched and shivering, buried its tiny head in his wet fur, as if it trusted him completely. Ethan waded into the water up to his waist, cold, biting through his jeans. The current yanked at him, but he reached out just as Milo's paw brushed the roots. One final push, and Ethan grabbed the cub, clutching it to his chest. The little body was limp at first. No movement. Ethan rubbed its fur, whispering, "Come on, kid, don't quit on me now." Then a cough, a squeak, a trembling breath. He laughed, half in shock, half in relief. "You're alive! You're actually alive!" Behind him, Milo collapsed onto the muddy root's chest, heaving too tired even to shake off the water. Ethan turned, stroking his head. "You crazy hero. You did it." The river began to calm its rage, draining into silence. For a moment, everything stood still. The man, the dog, the cub. The world had stopped spinning. But then a new sound crept into the air. A deep, rolling growl. Ethan froze. The cub's ears twitched. Milo's head lifted, weakly, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. The hairs on his neck rose like static before lightning. From the reeds behind them, shadows moved. Shapes silent, powerful, deliberate. Ethan's instincts screamed, "Run!" But his body didn't move. His breath caught when he saw them clearly, 3 lionesses emerging from the tall grass, their eyes fixed on him. Behind them, a massive male mane darkened with rain, gaze locked on the cub pressed to Ethan's chest. The cub whimpered. The air thickened. Ethan slowly backed up, his mind racing. There was nowhere to go. The river behind him. The pride before him. Milo struggled to his feet, standing between Ethan and the lions. His legs shook, but his stance didn't falter. He growled low, protective, even as water dripped from his fur. Ethan's hands trembled. "No, Milo. Please don't. You've done enough." But the dog didn't listen. He took a step forward. The lionesses circled, silent as ghosts. The male raised his head, powerful, unreadable. Ethan waited for the attack, for the violence nature was known for. But what happened next shattered everything he thought he knew. The massive lion stood still for a long, unbearable second, then lowered his head. Slowly, deliberately. His forepaws came together as if he were bowing. Ethan's eyes widened. He blinked, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But then the lionesses did the same, bowing their heads, paws touching the earth in quiet reverence. Not a sound, not a roar, just the wind through the reeds and the faint beat of a grateful heart. Milo stood frozen, panting, as if unsure whether he was dreaming too. The cub wriggled free from Ethan's arms, padding unsteadily toward its mother. The lioness sniffed it once, then pulled it close, eyes softening with something that looked impossible, though it was like gratitude. Ethan swallowed hard, overwhelmed. He didn't dare move, didn't dare speak. And then, as quietly as they appeared, the lions began to retreat into the mist, leaving only the whisper of grass and the shimmer of water in their wake. Ethan turned to Milo, voice trembling. They didn't attack. They bowed. Milo blinked up at him, too tired to wag his tail, but in his eyes there was something calm, proud, ancient. Ethan looked back at the retreating pride, still trying to understand what he had witnessed. In that wild silence, he realized the truth. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment of recognition between species, between hearts, between courage and grace. And though he didn't know it yet, that moment would follow him for the rest of his life. Because sometimes the wild doesn't take it. Thanks. When people talk about courage, they usually imagine soldiers, firefighters, or heroes in uniforms. But courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it takes the shape of a soaked, trembling golden dogs standing between life and death, with nothing but heart. Milo was that shape. The rain had slowed, but the river still snarled like something alive. Ethan could see it in the dog's eyes. He wasn't acting on impulse anymore. He had decided. And decisions like that don't come from training. They come from love. "Milo, don't you dare!" Ethan shouted, voice cracking under fear. But the words were too late, too small. The dog's body arched, his paws left the ground, and in one breathtaking moment, he became pure motion gold against gray sky before crashing into the river below. For a second, everything vanished. The splash swallowed him whole. Ethan's lungs locked up. The world narrowed to that one spot where the water churned. Seconds felt like minutes. Then air broke, and Milo surfaced coughing, pushing through the torrent like a creature born of both fear and faith. Ethan stumbled forward, shouting his name, but Milo didn't look back. The dog had one focus, the cub. That cub, barely clinging to the rock, looked more like a bundle of soaked fur than a predator's offspring. Each wave slammed against it, threatening to drag it away. Milo fought the current, angling sideways, smart, deliberate, using the flow instead of battling it. Every stroke was agony, but there was purpose behind it. And that's when it hit Ethan. This wasn't instinct. It was memory. He remembered the day he adopted Milo, a scrawny rescue dog who had been found shivering beside a highway, waiting beside his dead mother. The shelter staff said he wouldn't survive the week. But Milo did. He always did. Ethan realized then that Milo didn't see a lion cub. He saw himself. The current slammed into a boulder, sending a wall of water straight into Milo's side. He disappeared. Ethan screamed, racing along the edge, slipping in the mud. For a moment, all he could see were ripples, and then, through the foam, that golden head rose again, eyes blazing like embers that refused to die. He reached the rock, barked once short, commanding. The cub hesitated, tiny claws scratching for grip. Milo nudged closer, presenting his back like a raft. The cub whimpered, then took the leap. It was clumsy, desperate, but it landed. The cub clung to his fur, trembling. Now it was 2 lives against the river. Ethan followed along the shore, shouting encouragement, his voice hoarse. "You got it, boy! Keep going!" Just a little more. The current tore branches loose, throwing them across the water like arrows. One struck Milo's shoulder hard enough to make him yelp, but he kept going. His strokes slowed, but his direction never changed. And then came the twist, the one no one could have predicted. A sudden swirl like the river had found a pulse of its own. A whirlpool formed just ahead, sucking branches, debris, anything near. Milo saw it too late. The current caught him, dragging him and the cub into its spin. Ethan sprinted, screaming, powerless. In the swirl, Milo's head vanished. The cub shrieked a high, terrified sound that sliced through the storm. "No, no, no, please!" Ethan's knees hit the ground as he reached the edge. Then, out of nowhere, the water exploded. Milo burst upward, soaked and wild, gripping a fallen root between his teeth. His body twisted as he kicked free of the whirlpool. For a heartbeat, it looked impossible. But somehow, he made it. He paddled furiously, dragging himself toward the shallows. Ethan waded in waist-deep arms open, crying with relief. When Milo reached him, he scooped up the cub first, then threw his arms around his dog. Milo's heart hammered against his chest, fast and strong. "Good boy. You're insane, but you're my hero," Ethan whispered. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The river moments ago, a monster, now looked almost peaceful. The world seemed to pause, as if giving space for gratitude. But behind that peace, something else stirred, a sound deep and ancient rolling through the reeds. A growl. Ethan turned. His relief froze. Shadows moved in the tall grass, eyes glowing amber in the dim light. The mother had come. The cub, still shaking, made a soft noise, a cry both fearful and familiar. Milo stiffened, his body tense but unmoving. Ethan could feel the shift in the air, raw, primal electric. Nature was rewriting the script. The rescuer might now become the sacrifice. The lioness emerged slowly, water dripping from her whiskers, her muscles rippling with silent power. Her gaze flicked from Ethan to Milo, and then to her cub. Ethan braced himself. He'd seen documentaries. He knew what came next. But instead of attack, she stopped. The cub let out another cry, and that's when something miraculous happened. The lioness stepped forward, not with fury, but with grace. She looked at the cub, then at Milo, and lowered her head. Not in aggression, but in acknowledgement. It wasn't a snarl, it was a bow. For the first time in his life, Ethan saw what mercy looked like in the wild. And deep down he knew Milo hadn't just saved a life. He had reminded even predators what compassion looked like. The wind shifted. The sky broke open, light spilling through the clouds like gold melting into the valley. Ethan could barely breathe, not from fear anymore, but awe. Because courage, he realized, isn't about fighting the storm. It's about leaping into it, trusting that love might just change the ending. And somewhere in that golden light, the story of a man, a dog, and a cub had just become something no camera could ever capture. The moment the cub coughed, life returned to the world. Ethan pressed it gently against his chest, feeling its tiny heart flutter like a trapped bird. The sound was fragile, uneven, but alive. Milo stood beside him, chest heaving, his fur slick with river water and streaked with mud. He looked more spirit than animal, something carved out of sunlight and survival. Ethan couldn't stop trembling. His hands, his voice even, his breath all shaking with relief and disbelief. "You did it, buddy," he whispered, barely holding back tears. "You really did it." But the forest didn't celebrate. It held its breath. The only sound was the quiet drip of rain sliding from leaves, the occasional crack of a broken branch shifting in the current. It was a silence so heavy that Ethan felt it pressing against his ribs. He thought it was over. He thought they'd earned peace. But peace, he was about to learn, doesn't come without a test. Because behind him in that quiet, something moved. A sound, a soft crunch, deliberate, slow. Then another. Ethan turned. His heart seized. Out of the tall grass, the lioness stepped forward. Her fur glistened under the dim light, her eyes locked on the cub in his arms. Each step she took was measured, regal, terrifying. Behind her, 2 more lionesses appeared, and then the great male. His mane dark with rain dripped water like blood. Ethan froze. His mind screamed, "Run!" But there was nowhere to go. The river to his back, predators to his front. Milo moved between them again, weak but defiant, a golden barrier against the inevitable. The cub squirmed in Ethan's arms, letting out a high-pitched cry. The sound cut through the tension like lightning. The lioness's ears twitched. She stopped. The other lionesses halted too. The great male's tail flicked once, then stilled. Ethan whispered, "It's her baby." He didn't move. He barely breathed. Every instinct screamed to protect the cub, but another voice inside whispered something else. "Let go." Milo turned his head toward Ethan, eyes meeting his as if to say, "It's okay." Ethan crouched slowly, lowering the cub to the ground. The little creature stumbled forward, unsteady on its tiny legs, and made a sound halfway between a mewl and a cry. The lioness took a single step closer, then another. Ethan shut his eyes, ready for the strike. But it never came. Instead, he heard a low, vibrating sound, not a growl, but a deep, mournful rumble. When he opened his eyes, the lioness was bending her head. pressing her nose against her cub's soaked fur. She breathed it in like a mother inhaling the scent of a miracle. The cub buried its face into her chest, trembling. She made another sound, a soft, almost human hum of relief. Then came the impossible. The great male stepped forward, towering over them all. Ethan braced himself again. But the lion didn't roar. He lifted himself onto his hind legs, massive paws hanging in the air, and bowed his head. It wasn't dominance. It wasn't threat. It was reverence. The lionesses followed. One by one, they bowed. The forest seemed to bow with them. Ethan couldn't move. He didn't understand what he was seeing, only that something sacred was happening, something no man could explain or ever earn. Milo stood, trembling eyes locked on the lions. The great male turned toward him. For a long, breathless moment, predator and protector stared at each other across the narrow space of earth. Then the lion gave a single nod, a gesture of respect, and turned away. The pride melted back into the tall grass, silent as mist. Ethan sank to his knees beside Milo. His hands rested on the dog's soaked fur. The adrenaline drained, leaving only awe. "You saw that, didn't you?" he whispered. They thanked you." Milo's eyes fluttered shut. His breathing slowed but steady, his tail giving one weak thump against the mud, as if to say, "Mission accomplished." Ethan sat there in silence, staring at the river that had nearly claimed them. The same water that destroyed had also delivered grace. And as the storm clouds finally broke apart, sunlight poured through the valley, warm, golden, forgiving. He looked at Milo, at the world reborn in that soft light, and whispered, "You didn't just save a cub boy. You reminded me what it means to be alive." The wind carried the scent of rain and grass. Birds began to sing again, cautious at first, then freely, as if the forest itself had witnessed something worth celebrating. And though Ethan couldn't explain it, he felt it deep down. This moment wasn't just survival. It was transformation. He looked toward the path where the lions had vanished, then back at the river's shimmering surface. Somewhere inside, a quiet truth formed: nature doesn't always ask for forgiveness. Sometimes it offers it. He lifted Milo into his arms, whispering, "Let's go home." But as he turned toward the van, something glimmered near the riverbank. A paw print, large and fresh, pressed deep into the mud beside smaller ones. The lions had left their mark, not of threat, but of gratitude. Ethan smiled through tears. "Yeah," he said softly, "we'll remember this one." But the story wasn't finished yet, because the world doesn't end after the miracle, it changes because of it. And as Ethan walked away from the river, the next chapter was already waiting, something far greater than a rescue, something that would test what he'd learned about courage, compassion, and the wild bond between hearts. The valley had quieted again. The river, once a beast, now murmured like a tired old man who'd said all he needed to say. Ethan carried Milo toward the van, the cub's cries still echoing faintly in his mind. He could still feel the ghost of that moment. Lions bowing, sunlight breaking through chaos. A scene so unreal that it made the rest of the world feel smaller somehow. He thought it was over. He thought that was the end of their story. But fate, like the river, never flows in a straight line. That night, Ethan camped by the tree line, unwilling to leave just yet. Milo lay wrapped in a towel near the fire, breathing slow but steady. The flames reflected in his eyes like tiny sunsets. Ethan poured himself some lukewarm coffee, watching the mist crawl back over the valley. Everything smelled of wet grass and second chances. He whispered, You did something today the world won't believe, buddy. Maybe that's okay. Some miracles aren't meant to be proven, just remembered. The fire crackled. A branch snapped in the distance. Ethan froze, listening. At first he told himself it was the wind, or maybe a deer. But then came another sound. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Milo lifted his head, ears alert. His body tensed, though his tail didn't wag. He wasn't afraid, just aware. Ethan reached for his flashlight, sweeping it across the clearing. Nothing. Just the tall grass swaying. But something was out there, watching. Then, in the darkness beyond the firelight, two amber eyes appeared. Ethan's breath caught. No way. The lioness. She stepped out from the grass, like a shadow given shape. Behind her, barely visible, the cub, alive, healthy, curious. Ethan didn't move. Neither did Milo. The air between them felt charged, ancient. The lioness didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth. She simply stood there, her eyes reflecting both strength and serenity. For a long moment, predator and man shared the same silence, the same fragile peace built from what they'd both lost and found. The cub padded closer to the edge of the clearing, sniffing the air. Milo let out a soft whine, not fear, not warning, recognition. The cub's ears perked, tail flicking. It made a small noise, the kind animals use when they greet family. And that's when Ethan realized it had come to say thank you. His eyes stung. "You came back." To him, he whispered. The lioness turned her gaze toward Milo, and in that brief, wordless moment, something passed between them, something primal and pure. Not dominance, not submission, just understanding. Then she did something Ethan would never forget. She bowed her head. One slow, deliberate motion, graceful and final. Then she turned, nudging her cub back toward the darkness. The cub hesitated, looking back once before disappearing into the tall grass. Ethan exhaled shakily. "I don't believe it." Milo lay his head down again, eyes half closed, as if to say, "You saw it too. That's enough." The fire burned lower. The world was quiet again. But the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt earned. As Ethan watched the last sparks fade into the night sky, a thought struck him sharp, sudden and humbling. Maybe the wild isn't something we conquer. Maybe it's something that decides once in a while to trust us. He lay back on the ground, staring at the stars, feeling smaller than ever, yet more connected than he'd ever been. The fire cracked softly beside him. Milo's breathing steadied into sleep. And in that stillness, a memory rose, not of the flood, not of the fear, but of the moment the lions bowed. That impossible, holy second when all the rules of nature bent to kindness. He realized then that the true miracle wasn't survival. It was recognition, the moment when two worlds met in understanding, even if only for a heartbeat. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roared, deep, resonant, not of anger, but of presence. Ethan smiled. It wasn't a warning. It was a farewell. He whispered into the night, "Take care of her, big guy." The stars shimmered above him like watchful eyes, and the valley exhaled. But dawn would bring something he didn't expect, something that would turn this quiet gratitude into a message meant for the world. Because miracles, Ethan would soon learn, don't stay buried in silence forever. They have a way of finding light. Morning came quietly, as if afraid to disturb what the night had healed. The mist lifted from the valley in slow, curling ribbons, and sunlight poured across the wet grass like gold spilling from a broken jar. The storm was over, but something deeper had shifted, not just in the sky, but in Ethan's chest. He sat beside the dying campfire, a cup of bitter coffee in hand, watching Milo sleep. The dog's breathing was slow, steady, peaceful. Each rise and fall of his chest was a miracle Ethan couldn't stop staring at. He whispered half to himself, "You changed everything, didn't you?" In the daylight, the valley looked different. The same place, but not the same world. The river no longer looked cruel. It glimmered like glass reflecting the reborn sky. The trees stood taller, greener, as if even they had witnessed something sacred and were standing in quiet respect. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter and looked toward the far ridge where the lions had vanished hours before. For a second he imagined he could still see them, the lioness leading her cub, the great male following behind, heads held high. He couldn't explain it, but that image refused to fade. It wasn't just gratitude. It was connection. The kind that didn't need language, only heart. That was when the idea came to him, reckless, maybe impossible, but right. He grabbed his camera, the same one that had been hanging uselessly around his neck during the rescue. He brushed the mud off the lens and began shooting. The river, the paw prints, the burnt-out campfire, Milo's resting face. Everything. Every detail of what had happened here. It wasn't about proof, it was about preservation. About telling the story not for fame or views, but for memory. For understanding. He whispered, "The world needs to see what I saw. Not just what nature can destroy, but what it can forgive." As he spoke, Milo stirred, opening one eye. He gave a soft grunt, like an old man annoyed at being woken too early. Ethan laughed, brushing a hand over his head. "Yeah, I know, buddy. You hate the camera. But trust me, this one's different." Over the next few hours, Ethan filmed everything. His narration was raw, unpolished, full of cracks and emotion. He didn't hide his fear or the tears that came when he described the lions bowing. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The truth was enough. He finished the recording with a single line, his voice trembling. "I used to believe survival was about strength. But today, I learned it's about grace. And sometimes, grace looks like a golden dog standing against a river." He uploaded the video later that night at a local diner, unsure if anyone would care. The Wi-Fi was slow. It took nearly an hour to finish. When it finally uploaded, he shut the laptop, paid for his coffee, and drove off into the hills, leaving the story behind him like a message in a bottle. But by morning, the world had already found it. The video spread like wildfire. News outlets called it the Bow of the Lions. People from across the globe watched, cried, shared. Some said it was fake, others said it was divine. But everyone, even the skeptics, felt something. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Churches quoted it in sermons. Animal shelters played it on loop. Scientists debated it. Poets wrote about it. A moment that belonged to the wild had found its way into human hearts. Ethan's inbox overflowed with messages, strangers writing about courage, compassion, forgiveness. One letter stood out. It came from a child who wrote, "I used to be afraid of big dogs, but now I know heroes don't always look like people." Ethan cried reading that, because that's when it hit him. The story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed to remember that kindness still existed. He turned to Milo, who was lying on the porch of their small cabin, now soaking in the sunlight. "You did that," he said softly. "You changed how people see the world." Milo thumped his tail, once eyes half closed, as if to say, "That's enough for me." But the valley wasn't done yet. That evening, just as the sun began to set, Ethan walked back to the riverbank one last time. The water shimmered in hues of orange and gold, and there, at the far side, he saw movement. A shadow. A familiar one. The lioness. She stood on the ridge, the cub now almost as tall as her shoulder. For a moment, she looked straight at him. The distance between them didn't matter. Ethan felt the connection spark again, wordless and wild. Then the lioness bowed her head once more, a gesture of farewell, and turned toward the forest, vanishing into the glow of dusk. Ethan stood there for a long time, smiling through the tears. He finally understood the lesson that the river, the dog, and the lions had been trying to teach him all along. The wild doesn't belong to us, but kindness does, and when we lead with it, the world listens. The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Milo barked softly beside him, tail-wagging eyes, bright with something that looked a lot like pride. Ethan patted his head. "Yeah, I know, buddy." She came back to say goodbye. As the last light of day melted into night, the valley seemed to breathe again, whole, healed, and at peace. But stories like this never really end. They echo. They ripple. They wait for the next heart willing to leap into the river. Years passed, but that valley never truly left Ethan. He still lived near it, in a small wooden cabin surrounded by pine trees and the quiet hum of nature. Time had carved lines into his face, silver into his hair. But his eyes, those stayed the same, soft, steady, still searching for meaning in every sunrise. Milo, though older now, still followed him everywhere. His muzzle had turned white, his steps slower, but his spirit hadn't changed. Every morning, he'd lie on the porch, head resting on his paws, eyes on the horizon, as if waiting for something only he could sense. Ethan often found himself talking to him like he would an old friend. "You know, people still write about that day," he'd say. "Some call it a miracle, others call it myth. I guess the truth doesn't need a label." The video that had once been just a personal story had now become a movement. Wildlife charities used it to teach empathy. Veterans groups shared it to talk about courage. Even schools turned it into a lesson about compassion, the kind that crosses every boundary between man and beast. But for Ethan, it was never about fame. It was about what the moment revealed, that life, no matter how wild or cruel, responds to kindness in ways we may never fully understand. One chilly autumn evening, he sat by the river again, camera in hand, though he wasn't there to shoot anything. He was there to listen. The water had changed since that day, calmer, clearer. The roots that once held on for dear life were now part of a thriving bank covered in green. He whispered, "You remember this spot, don't you, boy?" Milo lifted his head, eyes bright, even in the fading light. His tail thumped once against the earth. Ethan smiled. "You know, I think that cub remembers too." And maybe he was right. Because across the river, just as the sky turned the color of embers, he saw movement. The brush parted, and there it was. The lion, fully grown now, mane thick and golden under the dying sun. It stood tall, proud, majestic. And beside it, a smaller figure, a new cub tumbling playfully near the water's edge. Ethan's breath caught. He didn't move. He didn't even raise his camera. Some moments are too sacred to capture. They belong only to the heart. The lion turned its head, eyes meeting his. For a long, timeless instant, they simply looked at each other, two lives forever, tied by one impossible act of mercy. Then the lion did what no one on earth would believe if told. It lowered its head in the same quiet bow its father had given years ago. Ethan smiled through tears. "Yeah, I remember too." Milo barked once, low and soft, tail wagging slowly. The lion turned, nudged its cub gently, and the two disappeared into the tall grass, into legend. Ethan sat there long after they were gone, letting the wind brush against his face. He finally understood the full circle of it all. The river had taken much that day, but it had given more. It had washed away fear, replaced it with faith. It had turned a rescue into reverence and a fleeting moment into something eternal. He looked down at Milo, who rested quietly beside him. "You didn't just save a cub," he said softly. "You saved me, too." As the stars began to bloom above the valley, Ethan whispered his final thought to the night. Courage isn't loud. It doesn't need applause. Sometimes it's just love choosing to act when fear says wait. The wind carried his words downstream to the same river that had once roared with fury. And if you listened closely, it almost sounded like an answer, soft, gentle, and endless. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade here. Leave a comment below, tell me what courage means to you, or share a story about an animal that changed your life. Hit like if Milo's bravery moved you, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life tales that remind us how powerful compassion can be. Because somewhere out there another story like this is waiting to be told. And when it finds you, you'll know.